Silas Creed found her in the ashes, small hands wrapped around bread that should have fed her 3 days past. The settlement of Bitter Creek lay in ruins around them, smoke still curling from blackened timber, bodies scattered where they'd fallen. The militia had already decided she was guilty, a child, Pawnee. Alive, when everyone else was dead. That was evidence enough for men who needed someone to blame. They formed a half circle around her, rifles pointed at a girl who barely reached their waists. She didn't run, didn't beg, just held that charred loaf against her chest like it was made of gold and whispered 6 words that would change everything. "You can take my bread instead." Before we dive into the story, I need you to do something for me. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more heartwarming stories tomorrow. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I love hearing from you all. Now let's continue with the story. Silas stared at the child, at the bread extended toward him with shaking fingers, at eyes that had seen too much death for someone so young. The militia captain, a man named Voss with a face like carved granite, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Hang her now," he said. "Make an example. Let the savages know what happens when they burn white settlements." The men murmured agreement. Ropes were already being prepared. The girl's arm didn't waver. The bread stayed offered. Something in that gesture cracked open a place in Silas's chest he'd kept sealed for 3 years, since fever took his daughter. Since he'd watched Emma waste away to nothing, her small hand going cold in his. This child had that same hollow look, that same starvation, not for food, but for someone to see her as human. He stepped between the girl and the rifles. The clearing went silent, except for wind moving through destroyed homes. Voss's eyes narrowed. "You got something to say, Creed?" Silas didn't look back at the child. Didn't need to. He could feel her there, small and trembling, still holding out that bread. "I'm claiming her," he said. "Frontier law says orphan survivors can be claimed by any citizen willing to provide." The militia captain laughed, harsh and ugly. "She ain't no orphan. She's a murderer. Look around you." Silas finally turned, looked down at the girl who'd offered her last piece of food to a stranger. She met his eyes for the first time. In them, he saw his daughter. Saw every child who'd ever been broken by a world too cruel. Saw a chance to save someone when he'd failed before. "She's mine now," he said, "and you'll have to kill me to take her." The town made their hatred clear. Silas walked through Bitter Creek with the girl behind him, and doors slammed shut. Women pulled their children inside. Men spat at his boots and called him traitor, Indian lover, fool who'd doom them all. The baker refused to sell him flour. The blacksmith turned his back when Silas needed horseshoes repaired. Even the priest crossed the street to avoid them. The girl didn't cry, didn't speak, just followed 3 steps behind with that bread still locked in her small fist, now 4 days old and hard as river stone. His cabin sat 2 miles outside town, isolated by choice before all this. Now that isolation felt like exile. Silas pushed open the door, and the girl stopped at the threshold. Wouldn't cross it. He didn't force her, just left the door open, started a fire, put water on to boil. She stood there until dark came, silhouetted against the dying light, clutching that bread like a lifeline. When stars filled the sky, she finally stepped inside, moved immediately to the farthest corner, and pressed her back against the wall. Made herself small, invisible. Silas cooked beans and cornbread. Set a plate near her, not too close. She didn't touch it. He ate in silence, cleaned up, prepared his bedroll by the fire. The girl watched every movement, like he might transform into something that would hurt her. He understood. Trust was a luxury for children who hadn't been broken yet. He lay down and closed his eyes, gave her the privacy of pretending he wasn't watching. Hours later, he heard the smallest sound, the scrape of a tin cup, the quiet gulp of someone drinking water like they'd crossed a desert. When morning came, the cup was back in its place. The food remained untouched. This pattern held for days. Silas worked his land, mended fences, tended his small herd of cattle. The girl sat in that corner, unmoving, barely breathing. He talked to her anyway, told her about the weather, about the work he was doing, about nothing important. She never responded. But on the sixth day, when he returned from checking the cattle, he found her sitting 3 feet closer to the center of the room. Progress measured in inches. He acted like he didn't notice. A week became 2. The townspeople's anger didn't fade. Someone painted "Savage Lover" across his barn door. He washed it off. They slaughtered one of his cattle and left it rotting in his field. He buried it. Through it all, the girl watched. Silent. Haunted. Still holding that crumbling piece of bread that had somehow become more important than food or water or safety. Silas didn't ask why. Some things were too sacred for questions. 3 weeks after he brought her home, the girl started following him. Not close, never close, but she'd emerge from the cabin when he went to work and shadow him like a ghost. She didn't help, didn't speak, just stood 20 paces back and watched everything he did with those ancient eyes that had seen too much. Silas pretended she wasn't there, gave her space to be curious without pressure. He fixed the chicken coop while she observed from behind a tree, repaired the well while she crouched near the fence line, chopped wood while she sat on a distant stump, that bread still clutched in one small hand. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Silas was stringing new barbed wire along the north pasture when the wire snapped back and tore open his palm. Blood welled up fast, hot and red, dripping into the dust. He cursed, pressed his bandana against the wound, started walking back toward the cabin for clean cloth. Then he heard running footsteps. The girl appeared in front of him, breathing hard, eyes wide. She'd never moved that fast before, never come that close. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength and pulled him toward the water pump. Her touch was the first time she'd made contact with another human being since he'd found her. She worked with practiced efficiency. Pumped water into a bucket, tore strips from an old flour sack hanging nearby, cleaned his wound with careful fingers. Silas watched her face, saw the concentration there, the muscle memory of someone who'd done this before. For others. For people she'd loved. The girl wrapped his hand with skill that shouldn't belong to someone so young, tied off the bandage with a neat knot. When she finished, she stepped back quickly, putting distance between them again. But Silas had seen something in those brief moments of contact. The rope burned circling her wrists, thick and deep, the kind that came from being bound for days or weeks. The healed welts across her forearms, precise and deliberate. Someone had hurt this child methodically. Someone had chained her like an animal. His stomach turned. She noticed him staring and pulled her sleeves down fast, tried to hide what he'd already seen. The bread in her other hand was crumbling now, falling apart after weeks of constant holding. Pieces dropped to the ground between them. She looked down at the fragments in the dust, and for the first time since he'd found her, her face showed something other than blank survival, loss. Fresh and raw. That bread was dying, and with it, something she needed to keep breathing. Silas knelt slowly, picked up the largest piece, and held it out to her. She took it with shaking fingers, pressed it back against her chest, and ran for the cabin. They came at dusk on the first day of October. Silas saw the dust cloud before he saw the riders, counted 8 horses moving fast across the prairie toward his land. He recognized the lead horse immediately. Dalton Reeves, the richest rancher in 3 territories, whose son had died in the Bitter Creek raid. Behind him rode men with torches already lit, flames bright against the dying light. This wasn't a visit. This was a reckoning. Silas walked out to meet them, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. The girl emerged from the cabin behind him. He told her to stay inside, to hide, but she pressed herself against his back instead, her small hand gripping his shirt. He felt the bread fall, heard it hit the dirt. In 4 weeks, that bread had never left her hand. Now it lay in the dust between them and the approaching riders. Something had shifted. Dalton pulled his horse up 10 feet away. His face was stone, carved by grief into something harder than anger. The men with him spread out in a semicircle, blocking any escape. "You've had your fun playing savior," Dalton said. His voice was quiet, which made it worse. "Now hand over my son's killer." Silas didn't move. "She's a child. She killed nobody." Dalton's horse stamped, sensing its rider's tension. My boy was 16 years old, had his whole life ahead. Now he's in the ground because of her kind. The girl's grip on Silas's shirt tightened. He could feel her trembling. One of the other riders, a man Silas recognized from the general store, spat into the dirt. "We gave you time to come to your senses, Creed. Time's up. The town wants justice." Silas's rifle came up slowly, still not aimed, but no longer pointing down. Justice would be finding who really did this. That girl survived the same raid that killed your son. She's a victim, same as him. Dalton's jaw clenched. She's a savage. Her people burned my boy alive. I heard him screaming. His hand moved to the pistol at his hip. "Now, step aside or we go through you." The girl moved then. Stepped out from behind Silas. Stood beside him instead. She was tiny next to his frame, barely reaching his chest, but she stood straight, met Dalton's eyes, didn't flinch when he stared down at her with pure hatred. Silas felt something break and reform in his chest. This child who wouldn't speak, wouldn't trust, wouldn't let go of a piece of bread, was choosing to stand with him, was choosing to fight. He shifted his stance, placed himself slightly in front of her again. "You want her?" he said quietly. "You kill me first." Dalton smiled, cold and empty. "That can be arranged. We'll be back tomorrow. Bring the whole town if we have to." He wheeled his horse around and the riders followed, torches trailing smoke into the darkening sky. The cabin felt smaller that night. Silas cleaned his rifle, checked his ammunition, prepared for a fight he knew he couldn't win. 8 men minimum, probably more by morning. He'd take some down, but numbers didn't lie. The girl sat across from him, watching his preparations with those unreadable eyes. The bread lay forgotten on the table between them, finally released after a month of constant holding. When midnight passed and Silas started to nod off in his chair, she spoke for the first time. Her voice was rough from disuse, accented but clear. They were not Pawnee. Silas jerked awake. The girl hadn't moved, but her eyes were fixed on him now, with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "What?" She swallowed hard, like speaking cost her something vital. "The men who killed the settlement, they were white. Painted like my people, wearing our clothes, but white." The words came faster now, tumbling out like a dam had broken. "They came to my village first, 3 days before Bitter Creek. Killed everyone, my mother, my father, my baby brother. I hid in the root cellar and watched through the cracks." Silas set down the rifle, listened. The girl's hands twisted, together, knuckles white. "They took our war paint, our weapons, our clothes. I heard them talking. They said burn the settlement, make it look like Indians did it, start a war. Then the land would be cheap to buy. They kept me alive because one of them wanted to sell me south, said I'd fetch good price." Her voice cracked. "They chained me in a wagon, beat me when I screamed. When they attacked Bitter Creek, they left me tied up 2 miles away. I got loose after. Went looking for anyone alive." "The bread," Silas said quietly. She looked at it on the table, crumbling and ancient. "My mother made it that morning. Before they came, she gave it to me with breakfast, told me to eat slow because it had to last all day. I was still holding it when I heard the screaming start. Tears tracked down her face, but her voice stayed steady. I kept it because it was the last thing she touched. The last thing made with love before everything ended. Now I have you." The words hung in the air between them. Silas moved around the table, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He knelt beside her chair and she collapsed against him, finally weeping, finally letting the grief pour out. He held this broken child while she shook apart, while 4 weeks of silence transformed into sobs that seemed too big for her small frame. Outside, the wind picked up. Tomorrow would bring violence. But tonight, in this moment, a little girl finally had someone to catch her when she fell. Dawn came cold, and Silas made a decision that would either save them or get them killed. He saddled his horse while the girl, who'd finally told him her name was Aida, gathered the evidence she'd described. A knife left behind at her village, distinctive with initials carved into the handle. A torn piece of cloth from a settler's shirt, definitely not buckskin. a broken chain that had held her in that wagon. They rode into Bitter Creek as the sun cleared the horizon, Aida seated in front of him, visible to everyone. The town went silent. Shopkeepers froze mid-sweep. Women clutched their children. Men reached for weapons they weren't quite ready to draw. Silas rode straight to the sheriff's office and dismounted. Aida stayed close, her hand finding his. The sheriff, a thick man named Warren Reeves, stepped onto the porch. Dalton's younger brother. Silas's stomach sank, but he'd come too far to turn back. "I have evidence," he said loudly, making sure the gathering crowd could hear. "Evidence that proves who really killed those people." Warren's face went carefully blank. "That's so?" He looked at Aida with obvious disgust. "And I suppose the little savage told you a convenient story." Silas pulled the knife from his saddlebag, held it up. "Check the initials. R.B. Ask around who that belongs to. Then check if any settlers are missing clothes that match this fabric." Warren didn't move to take the evidence. The crowd pressed closer, murmuring. Silas felt the shift in the air, the way violence gathers before it breaks. "This is a waste of time," Warren said. "We know who did this." A voice came from the crowd. "Let him show the knife." Silas turned, surprised. It was the blacksmith, a man who'd refused him service just days ago. "If there's proof, we should see it." Others nodded. Warren's hand moved to his pistol. "You all want to take the word of a child over good Christian folk? The knife stays with me for investigation." He reached for it, but Silas pulled back. "I'm taking this to the territorial marshal. You can investigate or you can explain to her why you refused." Warren's face went red. "The marshal is 3 days north. You won't make it that far." Dalton and his men appeared from the saloon, moving to flank the sheriff. "You're not leaving this town," Warren said. Silas lifted Aida onto his horse, swung up behind her. The crowd parted slightly, just enough. He could see the calculation in Warren's eyes, weighing whether to shoot them in front of witnesses. Aida pressed back against Silas's chest, her small body tense. He kicked his horse forward, and they bolted through the gap. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets whined past their heads. Silas leaned low over Aida, shielding her with his body as they raced for the open prairie. Behind them, horses screamed and men shouted. The hunt had begun. They rode for 3 days straight, stopping only when the horse couldn't go further. Aida learned to load rifles while they moved, her small fingers quick and sure. She watched the horizon constantly, spotting dust clouds before Silas did. Twice they had to hide, pressing themselves flat in gullies while riders passed close enough to hear their conversations. The men were hunting them seriously. On the third night, they reached Fort Bridger and the office of Marshal Cordelia Finch. She was a woman in her 40s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Aida's story without interruption, examined the evidence with careful attention, asked questions that proved she was actually thinking. When Aida finished, Finch leaned back in her chair. "I believe you." Both of you looked at her in shock. The marshal smiled grimly. "I've been watching land grabs in this territory for 2 years. Someone's been pushing tribes out systematically, sparking conflicts that make settlers sell cheap. Never had proof, though. This fits the pattern." Silas felt hope for the first time in days. Then Finch crushed it. "But belief isn't enough. I need to catch them in the act or get a confession. Right now, it's the word of a child against established ranchers. No judge will convict on that." Aida's face fell. Silas wanted to punch something. "So what do we do?" Finch stood, paced to the window. "We set a trap. Use you two as bait. The men who did this know Aida can identify them. They'll come to silence her permanently. When they do, my deputies and I will be waiting." "It's too dangerous," Silas said immediately. "She's a child." Finch looked at Aida. "I know, but it's the only way. If we don't stop this now, more people die. More tribes get blamed. The cycle continues." Aida stood up straighter. "I'll do it." Silas grabbed her shoulder. "No. You've been through enough." She looked up at him with those ancient eyes. "If I don't do this, the men who killed my family win. They get away, kill more people, blame my people for things we didn't do. I'm tired of running." The weight of her words settled over the room. Finch nodded slowly. "We'll do it at the site of your village. Sacred ground. They'll come there thinking it's poetic justice. My men will be hidden in the rocks. You'll be protected. Silas wanted to refuse, wanted to grab Aida and run somewhere they'd never be found. But he saw the determination in her face, the need to fight back after being helpless for so long. He'd taken that from his own daughter when she was dying, made decisions for her instead of with her. He wouldn't make that mistake again. All right, he said quietly. We do this together. Aida reached for his hand. Squeezed once. Together. The canyon where Aida's village once stood was a graveyard. Burned lodges, scattered belongings, bones that hadn't been buried properly. Finch positioned 6 deputies in the rocks above, hidden but ready. Silas and Aida sat by a fire in the open, exposed and vulnerable. Bait. The sun dropped toward the horizon, and Silas checked his rifle for the 10th time. Aida sat perfectly still, staring into the flames. You don't have to do this, he whispered. She didn't look at him. Yes, I do. They came an hour after dark, horses moving slow, trying for stealth. Silas counted 8 riders, same as before. Dalton in the lead, Warren beside him. But as they got closer, Silas saw others. Town council members, the banker, the land office clerk. His blood went cold. This wasn't just a few bad men. This was organized, coordinated. Half the town's leadership was riding toward them with murder in mind. Dalton reined up 30 feet away. The others fanned out, surrounding the fire. Well now, he said, almost friendly. Saved us a long ride. Thought we'd have to track you all the way to Denver. Silas stood slowly, putting himself between the riders and Aida. Marshal Finch knows we're here. You touch us, and you hang. Dalton laughed. The marshal is 3 days back. And even if she wasn't, who's she going to believe? Us or a half-breed child? Warren dismounted, hand on his pistol. You should have stayed out of this, Creed. Could have lived quiet. Now you're a loose end. Aida stood, moved beside Silas. Her voice rang clear in the canyon. You killed my family. Wore our clothes. Painted your faces. Started a war so you could steal land. Warren's face twisted. Smart little thing, isn't she? Shame she won't live to tell anyone. The banker spoke up, nervous. We didn't want this. But the land rush is coming. Railroads coming through. Those mineral rights are worth millions. The tribes had to go. So you murdered children, Silas said flatly. For money. Dalton shrugged. It's just business. Nothing personal. He drew his pistol. Now, this ends. Gunfire exploded from the rocks above. Finch's deputies opened up, catching the riders in a crossfire. Horses screamed and bolted. Men dove for cover. Dalton fired at Silas, who threw himself over Aida, shielding her body with his. The bullet meant for her punched through his shoulder instead. Pain bloomed hot and sharp. He rolled, came up shooting, dropped one of the council members. Chaos consumed the canyon. Warren tried to run, but a deputy shot his horse. Dalton took cover behind a boulder, firing wild. The banker threw down his gun, hands up. Within minutes, it was over. 4 men dead, 4 captured. Silas lay in the dirt, bleeding, his arm around Aida. Finch appeared above them. Got 'em all. Every word recorded by my deputy with the notebook. You did good. Silas closed his eyes. Aida pressed against his uninjured side. We did good. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne filled beyond capacity. People traveled from 3 territories to witness a child testify against men who'd shaped the region's future. Newspapers sent reporters. Artists sketched the scene. This wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning. Aida sat in a chair too big for her, feet dangling, facing a courtroom packed with people who'd already decided what they believed. Some wanted justice. Others wanted her silenced permanently. The prosecutor, a thin man named Caldwell, started gentle. Tell us what happened the day your village was attacked. Aida's voice was steady but small in the huge room. They came at dawn, painted like warriors, but their eyes were wrong. Blue and green, not brown. They spoke English when they thought no one could hear. She described the massacre in detail that made women in the gallery weep. Described being chained, beaten, kept alive only because she was worth money. The defense attorney, a large man with a voice like thunder, attacked immediately when his turn came. How convenient that you remember such specific details. How do we know you're not lying to save yourself? Aida met his eyes. Why would I lie? Everyone I loved is dead. Lying won't bring them back. The attorney pressed harder. You expect this court to believe white men pretended to be Indians? That respected businessmen are murderers? She didn't flinch. I don't expect anything. I'm telling truth. You believe it or not is your choice. The defense paraded character witnesses for Dalton and Warren. Good Christian men, pillars of the community, family men who'd never hurt anyone. Then Caldwell called the deputies who'd witnessed the confession in the canyon. Played the recorded statements. Showed the evidence. The knife with initials matching one of the dead conspirators. The settler's cloth found at Aida's village. Financial records showing the defendants buying up land cheap after the massacres. The defense crumbled piece by piece. When Aida took the stand again for final questions, the defense attorney tried once more. You're just a child, a savage. Why should we trust anything you say? Silas started to stand, but Aida spoke first. Her voice rang clear through the courtroom. I'm a child who watched her parents burn, who was chained and beaten by men who smile in church on Sunday. You don't have to trust me. Trust the evidence. Trust your deputies. Trust what you know is true but don't want to believe. The room went absolutely silent. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. Guilty on all counts. Murder, conspiracy, theft. The gallery erupted. Some cheered. Others cursed. Dalton lunged at Aida, but deputies grabbed him. The judge banged his gavel until order returned, sentencing his death by hanging for all defendants, carried out in 1 week. Aida didn't smile, didn't cry, just reached for Silas's hand. He squeezed back. Justice wasn't victory. It was just the smallest beginning of healing. Spring arrived 6 months after the trial, bringing warmth that felt like forgiveness. Silas and Aida worked the garden together, turning soil that had sat fallow too long. She planted wheat seeds with careful precision, pressing each one into the earth like a promise. He followed behind with corn, then vegetables, then herbs. Aida said her mother used for medicine. The land responded to their attention. Green shoots, pushing through dirt that had only known blood and ash. Aida still had nightmares, still woke screaming sometimes, but she laughed now too, genuine sounds that filled the cabin with light. She called him Pa when she thought he wasn't listening. He pretended not to hear, the same way she pretended not to notice when he set 3 plates at dinner. One for her, one for him, one for the daughter he'd lost. They were both building something from ruins, creating family from the broken pieces of what they'd survived. The first child arrived in April, a Cheyenne boy, maybe 6, brought by Marshall Finch. Parents killed in a skirmish. Nowhere to go. Silas looked at Aida, asking permission without words. She nodded once and took the boy's hand. Showed him where he'd sleep, how to gather eggs, where the good fishing spots were. More followed. A Shoshone girl, 2 Arapaho brothers. A mixed-blood infant whose white father wanted nothing to do with him. Each time, Silas asked Aida first. Each time, she said yes. The cabin expanded, then a second building, then a third. By summer, 11 children lived on Silas's land. The town that had wanted Aida dead now whispered about the strange sanctuary growing on the outskirts. Some called it admirable. Others called it dangerous. Silas didn't care what they called it. He cared that children who'd been thrown away had somewhere safe to sleep, that Aida had purpose beyond surviving. That healing was possible even after the worst happened. The wheat came in golden and strong in late summer. Aida harvested it herself, spent days grinding flour, learning to bake from memory and experimentation. When she pulled the first loaf from the oven, perfectly brown and smelling like home, tears streamed down her face. She broke off pieces and gave them to every child. Then she wrapped a loaf and carried it into town. Found the blacksmith who'd spoken up for them at the trial. Gave it to him without words. He understood. Every Sunday after that, Aida baked bread. Gave it freely to every child, every stranger, every wounded soul who found their way to this small piece of chosen family. The bread that had been her last connection to home became the first gift of everyone else's healing. And in that garden where wheat grew strong, where children who'd been broken learned to be whole again, Silas watched his daughter, not by blood but by choice, teach the world what it meant to turn pain into purpose, to transform the offering of a starving child into the abundance of a survivor who refused to let cruelty have the final word. Before you go, I need you to do something important. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow, I have another story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Until then, take care of yourself and remember that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes.